over to you. Yeah, we're going to talk about grammar.
Yeah, every teacher's favorite topic. So that's a nice hello and welcome to everyone. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So my name is Chris. Or Chris Reese. I'm one of our CELTA trainers here at Great Education Center, where I'm also involved in CELT-P, CELT-S courses for teaching primary schoolers and teenagers, as well as working with preparation for Delta Module 1, writing materials, working with exams, you name it, anything they can find for me to do. But today we're going to talk about something which is kind of near and dear to me. Because to be honest, out of all of this stuff I do, there's something that brings me a little bit more happiness than those other things. And that's very often teaching teenagers. Very often when I talk about teaching teenagers, lots of people kind of get scared, start to run away, find the nearest table to hide under. But for me, teaching teenagers is something really, really enjoyable. But something I very often see when I'm working with teenagers is something that I see as soon as the big G word comes up, that when we talk about grammar, learners very often have one of two reactions. It can be this reaction where they're kind of happy to see it. They're very analytical. They enjoy studying grammar. It could also be a reaction something like this, where the learners begin to get anxious, worried, have anxiety. And this is the reaction, of course, that we don't want to see. But just to start us off and to think about where we might be going with this, I'd like us to think about this together. Could you type into the chat box your ideas? Maybe why don't some teenagers enjoy grammar? What is it about grammar that scares them off, so to say? Please leave your ideas in the chat. I'll give us about 30 seconds. Already lots of ideas. People saying they're confused, complex. They don't like the rules. They think it's boring. They're afraid of making mistakes. It's difficult, it's confusing. Some people may say that it's taught too much. I would also agree with that. Maybe some teachers may have an overly strong focus on grammar. Too many tables to memorize, if they have to memorize tables. Takes time to grasp. Yeah, lots of different ideas that are coming up here. And this is actually why we're giving the session and why we might be dealing with this. Because while lots of these things like difficult, complex, boring, too much to memorize, too much to learn, well, this is actually our job. This is where we come in as teachers. It's our job as teachers, as the people who teach them, to make sure that they understand things, to make sure they get the whats, the whys, the whens, the wheres, and the hows, to make sure that they're enjoying it, which means that there's a lot that we can do to help our learners with this. Now, when I was researching this session, I was trying to find this nice little backbone, something to organize the session around, some kind of key central idea, theme. And it was quite difficult because I was trying to think about, well, what problems should I address? And I was working on my CELTA course and I was rereading something. And before I get to what I was rereading, a brief summary of where we're going. I always get ahead of myself. Because today, well, we're going to be looking at 6 ways of either presenting or practicing language that I often use with teenagers. All of these examples come from my own lessons, and I did not come up with any of them. I will try to provide references where possible, but none of these ideas are original to me. And we're also going to be looking at why they work, how they work, the principles around which we're organizing each of these lessons. So going back to this idea of a backbone, something to organize the session around, I was rereading a book while I was marking some assignments by my CELTA trainees to make sure that I had gotten something correct. And I stumbled on something I hadn't read in a very long time. And it was written by this man. Does anyone, if anyone knows in the chat, can you write the name of this man? Does anyone, I'm just curious to see if anyone knows. So got some guesses about Murphy. No, good guess for a grammar topic, but it's not Murphy. I don't expect anyone to know who it is. This is, it's not Scott Thornberry. He's far too short to be Scott Thornberry. Scott Thornberry is quite tall in person, actually. This is a man named Lewis. Michael Lewis, to be specific. You might not recognize the name Lewis, but some of us might recognize the term lexical approach. This is the guy who invented it. Well, and that's what he's the most, or the guy who came up with the lexical approach, that's what he's the most well known for. But before he invented this entire approach to teaching language, in 1986, he wrote a book called The English Verb, where he was examining the different ways that verbs worked in English. It's a very good book if you're working on developing your language awareness. But there's a little well-known section at the end of his book where he gives what he calls 20 immediate improvements for the grammar teacher. There's 20 ways that we can immediately enhance our teaching of grammar. And these are all solid, practical suggestions. And this is where we're going to be starting today. Immediate improvements for the teaching of grammar. So as we're looking through these lessons, we're going to be going back and analyzing them through this perspective. Now, we will also be adding to Lewis's perspective because he wrote the book in 1986. And if we haven't made any progress in ELT in the last 35 years, then probably we're doing something wrong. But we're going to be using these as a set of guiding principles. So let's dive into the lessons that we're working with. And for the first one, I'm going to have to ask you if you recognize somebody else. I'm sorry, but I think you all might know this person a little bit better. Does anyone know this guy? He's got a very iconic theme song. Lots of movies made about him. Yeah, lots of people saying James Bond, or for me, this is the one true James Bond. This is Mr. Sean, or Sir, I should say, Sean Connery. He was an actor, and he played James Bond, the character James Bond, from the 1960s to, I want to say, the late 70s. And when I was a kid, I like most little boys, I liked all the spies, action heroes. I still do. And Mr. Connery is and has always been my favorite actor. And I always caught myself wondering if I had met Sean Connery, what I would ask him. Any guesses what I would ask Sean Connery if I met him? You can type them in the chat. He's my favorite actor, after all. Quite an old guy now. Ooh, what's the favorite one? Can you take me with you? Oh, if he could tell me how to become a spy. Cool. Did you used to like grammar? Ah, yeah, not a bad one. So now I'd like you to think about your own favorite person, your own favorite actor, actress, who they are. Can you just think about this? Can you type in the chat who they are, and if you could ask them any question, what would you ask them? Can you just leave this in the chat? So, for example, for me, it would be Sean Connery. And I would ask him, what was it like to be James Bond? So can you please type in the chat who it is that you would ask and what question you would ask them? So we've got Eugenia saying, so if you could ask anyone, if she could ask anyone, she would ask Keanu Reeves. She would ask if Neo died in the Matrix. Okay, we've got Harry from Myanmar. If I could ask anyone, I would ask Taylor Swift. And I would ask her how she overcame the struggles and rumors. If I could meet anyone, it would be Leo DiCaprio. What language do I keep using? If I could meet anyone, I would meet Johnny Depp. I would ask him what character was most similar to him. Yeah, the second conditional. There's this question I keep asking. If you met Sean Connery, what would you ask him? Now, I'm going to ask some yes/no questions. Can you just leave the answers for me in the chat? Now, do I think I will really meet Sean Connery? Do I think this is really possible? There's people saying no, not at all. But in this fake world, is this about the result if somehow I did meet him? Yeah, so people saying yes, cool. So we all as teachers, we know that this is our second conditional. I could elicit from you the answer now. If I met Sean Connery, I would ask him. But I'm not done. Yeah, people say, I didn't know that Sean Connery's died. Oh no, you've just broken my heart. Okay, so now I need to change my lesson then. Thank you for letting me know that. So now I can go through and start highlighting other things. I can ask my students, okay, if we look here, what part of speech is it? If you met, so what tense do I use with if here? If plus past simple. And I can keep going. I can ask, what tense do I use? Or what do I use to show the result? Yeah, and they'll tell me would, hopefully they'll tell me would plus bare infinitive. Right. And now I could even go on to clarify some features of pronunciation. I could say, okay, class, listen to me. Listen to the first part. Where does my voice go? If you met Sean Connery, is my intonation up or down? Hopefully they'll tell me going up. I can say, now listen to the second part. Okay, class, listen. Where does my voice go, up or down? What would you ask him? And then hopefully they'll tell me going down at the end, so that we'll have a sort of rise fall intonation. Right, or as Maria is saying, up and down. We could repeat it a few times together. And to practice this, I see lots of terminology being thrown around in the chat. We'll get to that in a minute, but let's not go too crazy with the terminology. If we said that one of the reasons our students don't like grammar is that it's too complicated, using lots of words and terms they don't understand won't help them then. So we'll keep it to if plus past simple, would plus bare infinitive, words that I expect my students to know. Or if they don't, I'll teach it to them. So after this, of course, students will need to practice. So the way that I would go about practice in this lesson would be to give each of the learners a separate question and let them interview people, let them stand up, walk around the classroom, interview people with their questions, and summarize the answers. While they walk around, of course, I will be very much listening to them, helping them if they get stuck, correcting their mistakes. But this would be the lesson in a nutshell. So when we talk about the bare bones, the introduction, this would be lesson 1. This is a lesson I very often use to teach the second conditional, albeit in a very short form. If we think about it and we look at it from the perspective of teachers, why might a presentation like this work? Well, the first thing that we do and that we're doing to make sure that our learners are successful is we're prioritizing meaning. And we're really checking that our learners understand the structure. I didn't stand up and explain to you the meaning of the second conditional. I can't. I can stand up and say, okay, class, listen, the second conditional is used to talk about hypothetical events in the present or is a general condition and is sometimes referred to, and they probably won't get it. Alternatively, if I give them a situation where it's really clear what it means, and then I ask them some questions, which I've planned beforehand based on the definition to make sure that they've got it, now this is going to work a little bit better. I'm making it easier to process. And we're also focusing on making sure that they understand the meaning as well as how to make it, as well as how to say it, because this is going to increase their confidence with the language. In my experience, watching hundreds of teachers teach grammar, most teachers don't value meaning. Most teachers want to jump straight to rules and structures and form. But when we prioritize meaning, we prioritize understanding. The second, as a similar way, is setting a relatable context that suits your target language. Here, the idea of meeting my favorite actor is something I know I'll never do, something my students know I'll never do unless I get really lucky. So the context of the conversation very naturally helps us use the second conditional. A similar idea is, well, to put this concept in very simple terms, if I need to teach the past simple, I probably shouldn't ask the learners to discuss their next weekend. May sound crazy, but I've seen it before. I'm going to avoid unnecessary terminology with the students. Very often, terminology is a very nice shorthand for us as teachers. It means that I can communicate something to another teacher very quickly if I need to explain something, much in the way that doctors work. When you go to the doctor doesn't explain to you the problem in medical terms. Well, they might, but they're going to explain it to you in terms that you can understand, even not being a doctor. But the way that the doctor describes the problem to you, the patient, and to their colleague, another doctor, will be completely different. So by avoiding this unnecessary terminology, we're making it a little bit easier. And avoiding isolated examples. I made sure that it wasn't just my example. There was a reason I was eliciting, trying to get your suggestions. In a real class, of course, I would be really eliciting, asking actual people. I was using the chat box for the point of saving time for the presentation. But this gave us multiple examples of the situation, or multiple examples that I was able to provide, even though we're working with a structure, even though my students weren't producing the language a lot, I was able to provide the examples. So this is where we're starting. This is step 1. Now, for the rest of the lessons today, I'm not going to go as in-depth in clarifying meaning, form, and pronunciation. This is for the sake of time, because we did talk about that for this one. But for the others, we'll just assume that we've done it, and I will clarify some very key points where it's really necessary. This was lesson 1. Let's move on to lesson 2. And for lesson 2, I actually need a couple of pictures. Can anyone type the name of this city? Anyone know it? City of Flowers, I believe it's called. Ah, yes. Beautiful Paris. And this city, does anyone know it? Some people might. Lots of people are saying London. Sorry, that's definitely not London. That is definitely that is Podol in Kiev. That is definitely Kiev, which is where I live, which is where I'm based out of. However, a long time ago, I went to Paris on holiday. I had a very extreme holiday in Paris, which you're going to find out about. I'm going to show you some sentences. These sentences will be either about my life in Paris or my life in Kiev. Your job will be to look at the sentences and type in the chat which sentence or which numbers are about my life in Kiev. Ready? Steady. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think. Lots of people are guessing that 1 is in Paris. I think 4 is about Kiev. They're all about Paris. Seems like we're not sure. Let me show you the answers. Because someone's got it. Someone's figured me out. Ben, you have figured me out, because here you can see the truth. These are about, the top set is about Paris. The bottom set is about Kiev. James, how did we know? How could we know before I told you which ones are which? Well, let me ask you a question. Did I go to Paris in the past? Right. Am I still in Paris? Well, no, I can look out my window. I can see Kiev. So here, these first sentences, can I say that they're about a closed period of time? And I would continue with my set of questions that it's a closed period of time, that I still live in Kiev, so this is connected with the present, ergo present perfect for an unfinished period. So this is a very good way. Well, why do I like this method of presentation? Because this method of presentation is very tricky. And it almost relies on learners getting it wrong, which is good in this case. Because the only way, really, any of these sentences could be about either city. There are museums in Kiev. There are museums in Paris. There is football in Kiev. There is football. There was football in Paris. There are attractions that can be closed in Kiev. There are attractions that can be closed in Paris. There's no way to know except for the grammar. So knowing which one is which relies on really paying attention to this difference in grammatical meaning. Whereas I could tell my learners, yes, which the rule which we've heard 100 times, yes, the past simple is for finished past actions. And the present perfect is for unfinished periods of time at the present moment. But when I give them a task that really makes them distinguish between the two, I really get to see how much they understand. And from here, we can move into practice activities. I could, for example, as a practice activity to this lesson, maybe give them a gap fill, and then I could ask them to make up sentences about themselves, maybe a game like two truths and a lie, true false sentences about themselves, maybe a good way to go from here. But the point with this method of presentation is that one, we're contrasting English with English. We're comparing two separate structures to each other, not to their L1 in this case, because for my learners who are Ukrainian or Russian speaking as their first language, they don't have perfect aspect in their language. So there's really something to compare, but not much. The second is that I'm going to avoid confusing explaining with understanding. Just because I've told them what it means doesn't mean that they got it. Whereas here, this task really digs into, do they get what's going on? And once they get what's going on, and if they've probably studied, they've probably heard something about present perfect somewhere if I'm running this lesson. They should know past simple, but maybe they're a bit lost. This lesson shows what they do and don't understand and gives me what to teach. And the other thing is that we're encouraging them to start exploring the language. Because what I don't want, I'm basically setting a trap in this lesson. I expect them to do spectacularly badly at guessing which city was in which. I mean, we're teachers and we even got it wrong. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. I want them to make mistakes at the beginning. And then when I pull the trick back, when I reveal the answers and start going through it, they say, aha, so that's the difference. We're not afraid of the mistake anymore. We're treating the mistake as the opportunity for learning, or what I call the something's going on moment. And well, this also allows me to share some of myself with the learners, because when you tell a group of teenagers that you were almost arrested in a football protest, they start asking you questions. Like, what happened to you? Why were you almost arrested in Paris by the French police? And you can share some information about yourself, which builds this rapport with the learners. It's a true story, by the way, but I'm not going to tell it here. I was innocent. This is method 2. This works very nicely when two structures are very easy to compare and contrast in terms of meaning. So let's have a look then at lesson number 3. Lesson number 3, right. So for lesson number 3, we're going to imagine someone. Well, there we go. I'd like you to imagine someone like this, someone you know. What's an adjective I could use to describe this person? So overwhelmed, a mess, confused. Yeah, I like it. Someone's hit the word busy and a workaholic. Yeah, this is basically me. This is actually a portrait of me. I cut my hair. So we've all got someone who we know who is very, very busy. Now, in an actual lesson, I would run this a little bit differently than I'm about to run this. In an actual lesson, I would right now put my learners into pairs. I'd let them discuss. I'd say, okay, so guys, who's the busiest person you know? Tell your partners about the busiest day from this person that you can remember. The only rule, you can't talk about yourself. And they would discuss, they would compare their ideas. What was the busy day they know about, the busy day they know about. We'd bring it back to open class. I'd ask a few of them and say, okay. So who is your busy person? Well, my busiest person's my mom. Okay. Well, what does your mom do? What did your mom do her last very busy day? Well, she took us to school, and then she went to the gym, and then she went to work, and then she had a long day at work, and then I had gymnastics after. And they start telling the story. They're talking about these very busy days. After they've shared a little bit, what I do with them, I share my very busy day, or the very busy day about my mother. I'll typically say, okay, here's the information about my mom. She's the busiest person I know. Can you compare your ideas, or you compare your people with my mom, see who's busier? This is a true story about it's a true story about my mom, actually. As we have a look at it, let's put our teacher glasses on. What grammar do you think we're focusing on as a result of this? Yeah, people saying past tenses, narrative tenses, exactly. So I've got a good text, I've got a good context. I could, at this point, stand up in front of my teenagers and say, okay, class, now listen. My teenagers are very energetic. They're very active, especially when I don't want them to be active. So me standing up and lecturing about, what do we have? Past simple, past perfect, past continuous, 3 verb tenses. That's not going to go over well. Someone's going to get hit in the head with a book 5 minutes into my explanation. So I need to keep them busy. What I'm going to do to keep them busy is I'm still going to give them my information, but rather than tell it to them, I'm going to print it out for them. And I'm going to give them a paper that looks something like this. So far in the session, I've been asking lots of questions, what we call concept checking questions, to make sure that learners understand. Here, I've got the same thing. I've got questions to make sure that they understand the target structures, in this case, past simple, past continuous, and past perfect. The only difference is I put them on a handout and gave them to the students, which actually frees me up to walk around, help the learners. I can put them into groups, let them work together, which helps me out if I've got a big class. It's easier for me to help, let's say, 5 groups of 4 students than it is for me to help 20 individual students. I put them in groups, they answer the questions, I walk around, I help, they finish, we come back, we talk about it as a big happy family in open class. Some people are asking in the chat, yeah, this is a technique which is referred to as guided discovery, but it's nothing more complicated than putting your teacher talk onto a handout and letting the students work through it. This is a way that I like to keep my teenagers engaged and active while we're studying grammar, because now they have to work together. And now because they're active, they're also behaving because I'm keeping them busy and they're not sitting and listening to me. A couple of tricks to make these activities work. You may find that, as I draw really quick, I really minimized the amount of writing they have to do. All they have to do, cool. How many events? 1 is still in process, finished. They don't have to write a lot. They don't have to produce big, long sentences or words. They just circle. They still have to get the right answer. They still have to understand it, but I made it easier for them to complete. And by letting them work in groups, I'm letting them also peer teach each other and collaborate. Now, I don't want them to do it for each other. I do want them to be active and helpful. So I don't want to make the groups too big. But I find in my own practice, groups of 3 or 4 students typically turn out to be ideal, especially if I'm intelligent with who I group with who. But that's every activity. So after this, of course, we would have to move on to practice. I could ask them to talk about their own very busy day that they've had recently, encourage them to use a good variety of tenses. I might give them a gap fill or something before that to check that they really understood everything before moving them on to talking about their own very busy day. So the point here with this activity is that the first thing we're doing, we're kind of flipping what we're doing in the lesson. Typically, we assume as teachers that I must teach them how to do it, and then let them do it. But there's sometimes a lot of value in letting someone do it first without teaching them, especially if I think that they will be reasonably successful if I don't teach them anything. If I'm teaching a group of, let's say, B1 plus teenagers, I trust that they can actually talk about their weekends pretty well. They can do this without my help. They can talk about their mom's pretty busy day without my help, even if I don't do anything. So the thing is, though, they can't do it as well as their teacher can. They can't do it perfectly. So this also gives them a space for them to notice the difference between what they're doing and what they can be doing. And it gives them something to learn from. We're also providing learners in this lesson with a realistic, authentic task. One of the reasons that my teenagers often dislike grammar is because it feels to them very abstract. They don't really see how they take these rules about past perfect for two events in the past where you want to talk about what happened first, but they don't see how they apply that to their lives. And teenagers, I think more than any other age group, really need to know why they're doing what they're doing. They want to know, when am I going to use this? Especially when they've got 8,000 lessons a day. They've got 8,000 pages of homework from 40 different teachers. They want to know, why should I spend my limited brain power on this? And we're making sure that the grammar is key to the communicative aspect of the task. Here, yes, they can talk about their mom's very busy day. They just use past simple. They can, but they can communicate more effectively, and they can talk about the day in more detail by being more in depth. And this also gives us a point to assess them. We can let them compare their first go with their second go. There's lots of directions we can go in from here. And when we can, make it collaborative. When the students have a chance to collaborate, it's very well documented that they learn more. If we think about time outside of class, how many times have we recommended that students form study groups? How many times when you were in university, did you go study something together, practice teaching something that was going to be on an exam to one of your friends? These were all collaborative learning strategies. And we know that from the research that these work. So by giving them these questions for clarification purposes and putting them into groups, we're enabling them to do this. Maybe someone studied this before and they can help the others. Maybe someone's really good at past perfect, but they struggle with past simple, past continuous. Maybe someone's really good at past simple, past continuous. They really struggle with past perfect. They can fill in the gaps in each other's knowledge. Yes, I do need to monitor to make sure that they're not just lazily copying, that they are involving themselves. I do need to monitor my class and manage my class. But assuming that I can do that, this works very well. Right. So this is lesson number 3. We're going to go on to lesson number 4. Right. Sorry, I forgot I put this one in the session. Lesson number 4 is going to be a practice activity rather than a full lesson. But we can use it as a practice activity for several things. I'm going to tell you what this is. This is a clip from a trick that I learned from another brilliant presenter wild guru, Chris Rowland. So this is not my own trick. This is part of what's called a fail compilation on the internet. All these videos where you see people who hurt themselves or crash or destroy their homes or have really terrible things happen to them because they were, well, behaving in, let's say, not the most intelligent way. I like to use this when I'm teaching a few things. But today we're going to say that it's past modals of deduction, things like must have, can't have, might have, could have. And the way this works, it's a very quick activity. Can you just type in the chat? Here you can see the result. Can you just type in the chat, what do you think must have, might have, or could have happened before this? Why is he in this position? Must have, might have, or could have. So he must have jumped. Jumping, he was rollerblading, doing tricks. He must have had his balance wrong. He might have fallen. Yeah. So we get the idea. Could have flown into space. I think he's about to fly into space. I think that's more about the future. So I'll tell you what, I would be a bad teacher if I didn't show you. Hold on, what he did. So I have the video here. Oh, I like this. He must have been going down the stairs in an advanced manner, very advanced. So here, I hope the video plays well. Here you can see what happened. It's going to come very fast. So ready, 3, 2, 1. So that's a big ouch. So it looks like some of our guesses were correct. And I could repeat this process a few times. I can go to a different part in the video. I can show my learners this. And I can say, what do you think happened? We go back a few seconds, we watch it. Repeat, 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 repeat. People say that looks painful. Yeah, it does look painful. And my teenagers typically can't get enough of it. For them, it's like, for them, it's addictive. So a very simple activity, and I can manipulate it in several ways. I can let them make their guesses, then compare with a partner before we watch. The last time I did this with a group of intermediate students, we wound up using this as a revision activity at the beginning of the next 5 lessons because they were begging for it. And my only rule was, yeah, but we've got to practice our past modals. They were fine with it. Especially the boys were very into it. Another useful thing about this activity is that you can easily adapt it for different language points. If you're teaching structures for future predictions, he might, he may, he'll definitely, he'll probably, then you start at the beginning and you say, what's going to happen next? What do you think? You can manipulate this by changing your questions to make it a very helpful activity, and giving them frames, structures to use to complete can help here. So a very simple activity, but what is it teaching us? Well, one that it's teaching us is very often in the literature, they make a distinction between what we call restricted or controlled practice, or authentic or freer practice. Now, those of us who are a little bit further along kind of methodologically, we may know that there's a difference between freer practice and authentic practice. Bear with me for a second. Where we control their language and where we don't control their language. And very often we think that we have to choose between either a controlled activity where I make them use the language and a freer activity, or authentic activity, which really reflects how the language is used. Some activities, sometimes with some activities, it could be both. I can set a rather controlled activity, because I said use modals of deduction. I even said which ones to use. But it's still very authentic. It's still very communicative. The learners are still engaged with each other's guesses, which means that this is still a valuable practice activity. Another point here is that technology can be very helpful within reason. I want to make sure the technology that I'm bringing into my classroom is really helping me achieve my lesson aims. Things like Kahoot, for example. These are lovely, but in many ways, Kahoot is just an electronic worksheet that plays music. It's fun, students enjoy it, but in terms of me achieving language learning aims, it may not be the best tool for the job. So really thinking about what technology we bring to the lesson and making sure that it's there for a practical reason. And again, emphasizing meaningful communicative practice. So we're going to go to the next one. The next one's also rather quick, and it has to do with the students themselves directly. Because I don't know about you all, but my teenagers very often have hobbies. For example, they might play sports, they might be into photography, they might be into science, they could be into books, literature, video games, whatever. But in my experience, my teenagers are very interested in things, and they have lots of passions. These can be a very good jumping off point for a lesson. Because one of the things that I like to do is collect little bits of knowledge about my teenagers. I like to find out what they're interested in, what they like, what they don't like, what they do at the weekends, what their hobbies are, for the point of planning engaging lessons. But in this lesson in particular, it comes in handy. Because very often, as a result of that, I might forget some things, or I might think I remember something, but I might not be quite sure. So what I do is I use this. And I ask them if I'm right in open class. I might ask them things like, Vanya, you told me yesterday you're going to a concert this weekend, aren't you? I think I remember that's what you said. I'm not sure. Could you tell me? Or I could ask them, Bogdan, I know you play football. You had a football tournament last weekend, didn't you? Yeah, I think you won. Or I can say, Anna, I seem to remember, yeah, you told me you'll miss a day next week. You'll miss a day next week, won't you? You're going somewhere with your sister? What day was it? Has anyone guessed what I might be teaching right now? What can you see in all three of these examples? Yeah, people saying question tags, good. Yeah, question tags, type questions. And from here, I can go through my typical teaching stages. I can highlight, okay, so do I know this information for sure? Sorry, bad CCQ. I can go through my teaching stages asking them questions like, do I have no idea about this, or do I think I'm right? Okay, I think I'm right. I think I know something. How sure was I with the first question? Not very sure. How do we know? Because I had rising intonation. The second one. So yeah, was I more or less sure in this one? More sure. How do we know? Falling intonation. So we can go through, we can highlight all the bits of meaning. And for practice, a very simple activity, just to ask them to do the same with each other. Pick 10 of your classmates. Think about something you think you remember, but you're not sure, and write a tag question to check. Let them mingle, ask their partners, see what they remember about each other. I like this activity a lot because this activity lets the learners show each other that they listen to and they respond to and they care about each other. And it also lets me, the teacher, show them this, that I hear you, I listen to you. I know, I really take into account what you say to me. Because my learners, very often when I do this lesson, they'll look at me and they say, wait a minute, Chris, you remember that? That was like 3 weeks ago. We were just talking before the lesson. Yeah, I do remember. And that rapport is built instantly, which means that I'm not only teaching grammar in this case, I'm putting the grammar back in the context it should be, and I'm building my rapport with the group and the group's rapport with each other. So, using the learners' lives and the events going on in them can be quite helpful. As well, we show the learners that we pay attention to them and we give them a chance to do the same with each other. This is motivating, it's encouraging. So the last one that we'll go over kind of quickly because we're running a bit short on time, happens when we get something like this. This is a text from a book that I use with my intermediate students. It's an otherwise good book, but it has a text about fair trade farms in Mali. And my Ukrainian teenagers who live in the center of Kiev typically don't care about fair trade farms in the countryside of Mali. So we typically need something to jazz this up a little bit. What I might do instead of asking them to read this, to make this lesson a bit more engaging, the first thing I might do is I might just tell them the beginning. I'll read to them out loud the first paragraph, and I will set them a question to listen for. Something very simple just to make them listen. After they listen, I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit. And I'll give them something like this. Say, okay, class, these sentences were things that you heard during the paragraph. Can you work together with a partner? Can you try to reconstruct the sentence? What do you think the original sentence was? So if they work, someone will say, okay, coffee grows in Mali. And say, wait a second, no, wait a second. Maybe coffee has grown. Someone says, no, wait, I know it. Coffee is grown for hundreds of years. They talk with their partners. I give them a few minutes, let them make their best guesses. Then we check together. From here, well, this is a passive voice lesson. I can address their mistakes. I can say, okay, guys, let's have a look. What tense was the first? So here, so we're studying passive voice today. We can go through the meaning of the passive voice, and we can talk about addressing their exact errors. Maybe they had no trouble with passive voice in the present simple and in the present or in the past simple, but maybe with will and with present perfect, maybe this was a challenge. So when I monitor them, when I listen to their discussions, I can have a look at them, and then we can spend more time focusing on their problems. The other thing that this does by kind of testing them first is it shows them that they don't know everything in this yet, and it gives them a reason to pay attention. Now, I need to be encouraging and treat their mistakes positively at this point, but this can be very helpful for learners, what we might call testing them, teaching them, and testing them again, or a test, teach, test approach to teaching language. So what are the benefits of this? Well, here I'm able to clearly identify what they need, and when I start at the beginning, I'll also see how good they are with passive voice. If they're not using passive voice at all, probably we're going to have to do some work today. If they're using it just with a couple mistakes here and there, maybe I can shorten my teaching stage and spend more time on practice. It encourages these mistakes as a tool for learning, because when I show them that they don't know everything, they understand there's something to learn. And this also means reacting positively to their mistakes, like we said before, and giving them a second task, a progress check, to see how well they've got it. And I may very well have to teach them more after this point. So if we wrap up today's session, there are a few key takeaways just to put a pin in this. One thread that goes through all of the lesson types that we talked about today is that they're all based in communication. And communication really needs to run through all parts of the lesson, from our teaching to our practice. We shouldn't have theoretical grammar lessons where we analyze for 2 hours and then a lesson where we apply it much later. The grammar is there for communication. We use grammar to communicate. That is the role of grammar in language. Grammar allows us to communicate more complex messages to our interlocutor. And we need to be able to facilitate this in the lesson. If they've studied the grammar, but they haven't communicated with it yet, they haven't finished studying. The second is that practice is more important than a presentation. The more that we lecture, the more that we explain, the more that we tell, the more we very often confuse our students, which is why most of these approaches deal more with either letting them work on it together and in a student-centered way, that way I can help them, or seeing what they know and what they don't know first to minimize my explanation to only the points they need. I do need to make sure they understand enough, but I don't need to overdo it. Rather, they learn better from clear input and good practice. Finally, they need to understand how and where they can apply what they're learning. They need to see the context. It's one thing if I know that the present perfect continuous exists. It's another thing if I know that that's the tense I use when I'm talking about how long I've been doing my hobbies, which is more concrete and easier for learners to apply. So these are the key takeaways from the session. We're a little bit over time, but I think we've got time for maybe 1 or 2 questions before the short break, if my moderators don't kill me. So let's say 1 or 2 questions in the chat. If you've got them, please feel free to ask. So we won't kill you, okay. So can we show one more time lesson 6? Yeah, so lesson 6, the key point with lesson 6 is that I test them with this activity. I've let them listen to the text as I've read it out. I test them with this activity, see how well they do, and then I check this activity. Or I check with this activity and use their mistakes as the point for teaching. Should we teach more basic terminology? I mean, it depends on what you mean by basic terminology. If you mean things like noun, verb, adjective, infinitive, gerund, this can be very, very helpful. If you mean things like teaching them the difference between, or when they study relative clauses, you are going to have to teach them the difference between defining, non-defining, then yeah, that's tricky. But I would say present these words in terms as they need them, because the more you teach them up front, the harder it's going to be. And if you can avoid them, I would recommend avoiding them. It's a good question. When we teach grammar to focus on speaking, is accuracy important? Yes. When we focus on grammar, we are in essence focusing on accuracy. What I typically recommend my CELTA trainees and my trainees on teacher training courses is that they really think about the stage of their lesson rather than the stage of their lesson and how accuracy focused it is. So for example, if I'm setting an activity like the video activity where they use must have, might have, could have, here, for me, this is very controlled and I want them to be accurate. So I'm going to be correcting. If I hear them make a mistake with a partner, correct it. If I hear a mistake in open class, politely correct it. If it's something more freer, maybe I've got a bigger problem. I'm asking them to come up with guesses for this. Then in this case, I might lay off and correct them after the activity finishes. The last one, how do you explain to students they have to learn and practice grammar? Easy. I make grammar a sneak attack. If you start the lesson saying, okay, class, today we're studying present perfect. Congratulations, you've lost half of them. If you start the lesson saying, okay, guys, I'm going to tell you about my holiday to Paris. Yeah, I was almost arrested once. And then we turn this from, okay, this was the conversation. How did I do this? Oh, I used this tool to help me, and this tool just happens to be grammar. And as I focus on engaging them and building the need and the awareness for it first, I think that's all the time that we're going to have before someone comes along and kills me. So if you've got more questions, we're going to have a short Q&A session after this with several of the speakers, I think, to open to more general questions. You can see my references here. These are all good references for teaching and learning grammar. Okay, sorry, I'm shutting up here. So thank you all very much.